The November rain slashed against the cracked pavement as Elena Vasquez stumbled through the abandoned industrial district, her worn shoes with holes in the soles splashing through icy puddles that soaked her feet numb. Her third shift of the day had just ended, dishwashing at the Chinese restaurant after cleaning hotel rooms in the morning, and before the late-night bar shift she had already missed because her body simply could not take another step. She had not eaten anything in 2 days, saving every scrap of food for her 8-year-old daughter Sofia, who was home alone with a fever that Elena could not afford medicine to treat. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but that pain was nothing compared to the weight pressing on her chest. The hospital bills for her dying mother, the eviction notice giving her 14 days to pay 3 months of back rent, and the secret she carried in her womb, a 4-month pregnancy from a boyfriend who had vanished with her last $200 the moment she told him. The shortcut through the warehouse district saved her 20 minutes of walking since she had no money for the bus, though every shadow made her flinch, and every distant sound made her heart race. Nothing good happens in dark alleys, her mother used to say before the cancer stole her voice and her dignity, and left her rotting in a hospital bed that Elena could not afford to keep. But nothing good had happened to Elena in daylight either, so she had stopped believing that light meant safety a long time ago. She pulled her thin jacket tighter against the bitter wind, feeling the cold slice through the threadbare fabric like it was not even there, and forced her exhausted legs to move faster. That was when she heard it, a sound that did not belong to the rhythm of rain and distant traffic and her own ragged breathing. A whimper. No, 2 whimpers, high-pitched and raw with terror, the unmistakable sound of children in fear. Elena froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. Every survival instinct screamed at her to keep walking, to not get involved, to think of Sofia waiting alone in that cold apartment with her fever and her fear and no mother to hold her. But those sounds, God, those sounds could have been her daughter. She had heard Sofia make those exact helpless cries during thunderstorms when fear gripped her small body and squeezed out those desperate little sobs that shattered Elena's heart every single time. She turned toward the sound, peering into the pitch-black gap between 2 crumbling warehouses. Her phone's flashlight cut through the darkness with its weak beam, and what she saw made the blood freeze solid in her veins. A man lay slumped against the graffiti-covered brick wall, his expensive black suit jacket drenched with rain, and something else. Something that glistened dark red in the pale light. Blood. So much blood pooling beneath him and spreading across the concrete like a living thing. His head lolled to one side, his face pale as death itself, but his arms were wrapped protectively around 2 small children, maybe 4 or 5 years old, twins with dark curls plastered to their foreheads and huge, terrified eyes that stared at nothing. Their tiny hands clutched desperately at his blood-soaked shirt, and they were shaking so hard Elena could see it from 10 feet away. Around them lay 5 bodies in black tactical gear, motionless, dead, their weapons scattered across the wet ground like discarded toys. Whatever had happened here, this wounded man had killed them all before he fell, and he had done it while holding his children in his arms. Will Elena walk away, or step into a darkness far more dangerous than any alley? Like and share if you want to know what happens next. Subscribe and hit the bell so you do not miss the next part of this story. Because sometimes the most terrifying monsters wear expensive suits and hold their children like they are the only light left in the world. Elena stood there as if nailed to the cold, wet concrete, the trembling beam of her phone light illuminating a scene that looked torn straight from a nightmare. She knew she should run, should turn her back and disappear into the darkness as if she had never seen any of this, but her legs refused to obey. The motionless man, the bodies scattered across the ground, the 2 children shaking in their father's arms. All of it should have terrified her enough to send her fleeing. But it did not. It was the children's eyes that held her in place. Large, pitch-black eyes filled with terror yet emptied of tears, as if they had cried themselves dry a long time ago. Elena moved closer, slowly, each step feeling like she was walking across shattered glass. She knelt beside the man, the sharp metallic stench of blood rushing into her nose and nearly making her retch, but she forced it down and reached out with shaking fingers to check the pulse at his neck. His heart was still beating, faint but unmistakably there. The instant her fingers touched his skin, the man's eyes flew open. Elena recoiled in fear, but it was too late. His blood-soaked hand clamped around her wrist with an impossible strength for someone on the edge of death. His eyes, dark as an abyss, locked onto hers, not pleading, but measuring, weighing whether she was an ally or an enemy. Elena held her breath, her heart hammering wildly, feeling the lethal force in his grip even as he bled to death. Then, suddenly, his gaze softened. Perhaps he saw the pure terror in her eyes, saw her thin, ragged frame, saw that she was only a desperate woman and not a threat. He released her wrist and rasped in a voice ruined by blood loss, begging her, "The children, save the children." The twin girl still clung tightly to her father's chest, but the boy let go and crawled toward Elena. His tiny, freezing fingers wrapped around her hand, and he looked up at her with eyes far too old for his young face. "Please, miss," he said hoarsely. "Please save my dad. Please, I beg you. He is a good man. He only wanted to protect me and my sister." Elena looked down at him, and in that moment she saw Sophia. She saw her own daughter in that pleading gaze, in that desperation, in that fear of losing a parent. If one day Sophia were to kneel in cold rain begging a stranger to save her mother, Elena would want someone to stop and help. She would want one kind soul in this cruel world. This is madness, Elena told herself. This is suicide. She had $3 in her pocket, a feverish daughter at home, a 4-month-old unborn child in her womb, and a life already miserable enough without more trouble. But when the boy tightened his grip on her hand, when the little girl looked up at her with hope for the first time since Elena found them, when the dying man whispered his plea again in a broken voice, Elena knew she could not walk away. She had never been able to abandon children. "All right," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "All right, I will help, but you have to listen to me. And you," she said to the man, "you have to try to stand, because I am not strong enough to carry you." She turned to the boy. "What is your name?" He swallowed and answered, "Marco. My name is Marco. And this is my sister, Isabella." Elena nodded and began removing the only thin jacket she owned, wrapping it around the 2 shivering children. The cold pierced her immediately, but it did not matter. "Marco, take your sister and follow me," she said, surprised by the calm in her own voice. "And you," she turned to the man, "hold on to my shoulder. We have to leave now before anyone else comes." The man studied her for a long moment, and in those dark eyes was something Elena could not read. Then he nodded and began forcing himself upright, teeth clenched to keep from crying out in pain. Elena slipped her shoulder under his arm. He groaned, a low sound of agony, but forced his legs to lock beneath him. He was almost 20 centimeters taller than her, and nearly twice her weight, his muscles dense as steel. Alone, she could never have moved him, but he was fighting to stay upright, taking some of the burden off her shaking frame, his muscles dense as steel beneath a blood-soaked suit. But Elena was used to carrying things heavier than she was. She had done it her entire life. "Let us go," she said, and they stepped into the cold rain, leaving behind 5 corpses and a pool of blood, walking into a journey Elena did not know would change her life forever. They moved like a procession out of a nightmare, slow and agonizing through the deserted streets of an abandoned industrial district, Elena bearing almost the man's entire weight on her shoulder, every step feeling as though she were dragging a massive stone straight through hell. The rain did not let up, cold and merciless, soaking through the last thin layer of clothing on her body and sending shivers through her in violent waves. She had given her jacket to the children, and now she was left with only an old, worn t-shirt against the November night, her teeth chattering uncontrollably, yet she dared not stop, dared not rest even for a single second. The man, whose name she still did not know, was losing blood at a terrifying rate. She could feel the warmth seeping through her clothes, running down her hip and thigh, mixing with the icy rain into a sickening wetness. Every time he stumbled, she had to brace herself and catch him, and each time her spine felt as though it might shatter. He weighed at least close to 90 kilograms, all dense steel, hard muscle, while she weighed less than 50 after 2 days without food. Marco and Isabella trailed behind her like 2 small shadows, hands clenched in the soaked hem of her shirt, their short legs taking 6 steps for every adult stride, yet not a single complaint passed their lips. She glanced back at them, and her heart tightened at the sight of their bluish lips and trembling bodies. Her thin jacket was no match for the cutting cold, but at least it shielded them somewhat from the rain and wind. "Hold on," Elena said weakly, her voice frayed by exhaustion. "We are almost there, not knowing whether she was lying or telling the truth because she no longer knew how much farther she could go. Her apartment was 6 blocks from the warehouse, a walk that usually took about 15 minutes, but under this weight, 15 minutes had stretched into an eternity. After roughly 2 blocks, her legs began to buckle. Her head spun, bright spots danced before her eyes, and her empty stomach cramped painfully, wringing out the last scraps of energy from nothingness. She had not eaten in 2 days. She was 4 months pregnant, and she was dragging a man nearly twice her weight through cold rain. It was a perfect recipe for disaster. "Elena," the man whispered weakly, and she startled, realizing it was the first time he had said her name, though she had never introduced herself, perhaps having heard the children call her. "Are you all right?" She meant to say she was fine, but in that instant the world tilted. Her legs gave out completely, her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed onto the wet, frozen pavement, pulling the man down beside her. Marco and Isabella's screams of panic were the last things she heard before darkness swallowed her. Miss, wake up." A small voice pierced the darkness in her mind, dragging her back to reality. She opened her eyes to see Marco's worried face inches from hers, raindrops or tears she could not tell sliding down his cheeks. "Please do not die," Isabella sobbed beside him, her voice breaking. "Please do not die like our mom." Elena blinked, the words hitting her like icy water to the face. Like our mom. These children had already lost their mother, and now they were terrified of losing her too, a stranger they had known for less than an hour. She forced herself upright, her head still swimming but her will returning. "I am okay," she whispered hoarsely. "I just slipped. Do not be afraid." She looked at the man and saw him struggling to sit up, his face white as paper but his eyes still unnervingly sharp and alert. He studied her for a long moment, then said in a low, rough voice, "You do not have to do this." Elena nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. "Now you say that," she replied, bracing herself as she stood and hauled him up again. "Let us keep going. We do not have time." They moved on, slower than before, more painful than before. Elena counted each step to keep herself conscious. 1, 2, 3, 4, repeating it like a mantra. She fainted once more after 4 blocks, this time only for a few seconds before Isabella's crying pulled her back. Each time she fell, Marco shook her awake with his small but determined hands, while Isabella cried and begged her not to leave them. These children had become the reason she kept moving when her body had already refused to cooperate. When the old 4-story building where Elena lived finally emerged through the rain, she nearly wept with relief. But the feeling lasted only a moment when she realized they still had to climb 3 flights of stairs with no elevator. She looked at the man nearly unconscious on her shoulder, at the exhausted children clinging behind her, then up at the staircase yawning dark like the mouth of a monster waiting to devour them. One step at a time, she told herself. Just one step at a time. 3 flights of stairs became the highest mountain Elena had ever been forced to climb in her life. Each step a battle, and each movement a small victory wrestled from the hands of death. The man, rousing slightly from the pain, grit his teeth and forced his legs to bear some of his own weight, though he leaned heavily against her, his 90-kilogram frame threatening to crush her narrow shoulders if she faltered. She did not know where the strength came from to keep going, perhaps from raw survival instinct, perhaps from the ragged breathing of Marco and Isabella struggling up behind her, or perhaps from the image of Sophia waiting above, her daughter, an 8-year-old child burning with fever and alone in the freezing apartment, with no mother beside her, no medicine, nothing but fear. That thought ignited in Elena's chest like fire, driving her shaking legs to climb one more step, then another, then another. When she finally reached the apartment door, she fumbled for the keys in her pocket with hands numb and trembling, nearly a full minute passing before she could even guide the key into the lock because her hands would not stop shaking and her vision had blurred with exhaustion. The door finally opened and Elena dragged the man inside, almost throwing him onto the torn old sofa in the corner of the room. He collapsed onto the cushions, his face gray and slick with sweat, his breathing ragged and shallow as the adrenaline finally left his body, his chest barely rising and falling to show he was still alive. Marco and Isabella rushed immediately to their father, small hands gripping his as if letting go would make him vanish. Elena had no time to look at them, because she was already rushing toward the small bed in the opposite corner, where Sophia lay curled beneath a thin blanket. "Sophia," she called, her voice catching in her throat. "Sweetheart, Mommy is home." She placed her hand on her daughter's forehead, and her heart seemed to stop, burning hot, so hot it almost scorched her palm. Sophia's fever was dangerously high, her skin flushed and cracked, her small lips dry and moving as she muttered nonsense in delirium. "Mommy," Sophia moaned without opening her eyes. "Mommy, I am cold. I am so cold." Elena pulled her daughter tightly into her arms, tears spilling and mixing with the rain still clinging to her face. She was frozen, soaked, so exhausted she could barely stand, yet her child was burning with fever and she did not have a single pill to lower it. She looked around her 1-room apartment as if seeing it for the first time. Yellowed walls peeling in patches, warped plywood flooring that creaked under every step, an ancient refrigerator that had not worked for 2 months, a gas stove with 2 burners of which only one still functioned. On the kitchen table lay unpaid bills, bright red eviction notices, and cheap flyers she collected so Sophia could draw on their backs. The refrigerator was empty. The food cabinet held only half a packet of instant noodles and a little salt. She had no money, no food, no medicine, nothing at all. And now she had 4 people depending on her, a man bleeding to death on her sofa, 2 children hungry and shivering, looking at her with absolute trust as if she could save their father, and her own daughter burning with fever on the bed. Elena sank onto the icy floor, holding Sophia in her arms, and for the first time that night she allowed herself to cry. Not loud sobs, but the silent tears of someone completely spent, tears sliding down her cheeks without a sound. She did not know what to do, did not know where to begin. She was only a 27-year-old woman who had been beaten down by life countless times, and now life was striking her once again. "Miss." The small voice made Elena look up. Marco stood in front of her, large dark eyes fixed on her without blinking. "Miss," the boy said, his voice strangely calm for a 5-year-old who had just seen his father shot and run through the rain. "Do not cry. Dad says men should not cry in front of women and children because it scares them. But he also says women should not cry alone because that is very sad. Do you want me to hug you?" Elena looked at the boy, a 5-year-old child trying to comfort an adult while he himself was frightened and exhausted. She pulled Marco into her arms along with Sophia, and Isabella immediately ran over and squeezed into the embrace. The 4 of them sat there on the cold floor, holding each other in silence, while the man on the sofa continued to breathe in weak, shallow gasps, and blood still seeped from his unbandaged wounds. Elena knew she did not have the right to collapse. Not now, not when 3 children needed her. She took a deep breath, wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and stood up. Elena laid the 3 children together on the bed, pulled the only thin blanket over them, and told Marco to watch over Sophia and Isabella while she took care of his father, and Marco nodded solemnly like a soldier receiving orders, his small arms wrapping around his sister and Sophia, as if he were a shield protecting them from every cruelty in the world. Elena turned to the man on the sofa and drew a deep breath, bracing herself for what she was about to do. She had studied nursing for 2 years before being forced to quit because she could not afford the tuition, and now that incomplete knowledge was the only thing that might save this man's life. She rushed into the tiny bathroom and searched every corner, finding a half bottle of disinfecting alcohol she had bought when Sophia scraped her knee the month before, a cheap roll of gauze, a sewing needle and thread she used to mend clothes, and an old pair of eyebrow tweezers. She looked at the crude tools in her hands and almost laughed at the absurdity of it. She was about to use eyebrow tweezers to dig a bullet out of a man whose real name she did not even know. She boiled a pot of water and plunged all the tools into it, sterilizing them as best she could think to do under the circumstances. Then she knelt beside the sofa and began removing the man's blood-soaked jacket and shirt. She tried not to look at his body more than necessary, yet she still noticed his tanned skin, the hard definition of his abdominal muscles, and more than anything else, the scars. So many scars, old and new, long and short, knife wounds and gunshot wounds, covering his chest and stomach like a map of violence and pain. This man had been living a dangerous life long before tonight. Elena focused on the 2 bleeding wounds, one in the right side of his abdomen and one in his left thigh. She poured alcohol over both, and the man jerked violently, a groan tearing from his throat even though he was still unconscious. "I am sorry," she whispered, though she knew he could not hear her. "I am sorry, but I have to do this." The thigh wound was only a graze, the bullet having passed through without lodging, so she cleaned it and bandaged it. The abdominal wound was different. She could see the bullet still inside, a small dark shape beneath the raw red flesh. Her hand shook as she took the tweezers and began to probe. Blood welled up, the man moaned and thrashed, and Elena had to pin his chest down with one hand while the other kept searching. She wanted to vomit. She wanted to cry. She wanted to run from the room and forget everything. But she did not. She kept digging, kept searching, kept praying to whatever God might be listening to. Please let her find the bullet before this man bled to death. 10 minutes or an hour, she did not know. But finally she felt the metal tips touch something hard and cold. The bullet. She pulled it free with a small wet sound and let it fall to the floor with a faint clink. Blood surged from the wound, and Elena quickly poured more alcohol over it and stitched it closed as clumsily as she could. The stitches were uneven and ugly and would surely leave a large scar, but at least they stopped the bleeding. When she finally finished bandaging the last wound, dawn was close. Elena sank down onto the floor beside the sofa, her back against the wall, her eyes fixed on the bed where the 3 children slept. Sophia was still feverish, and Elena could hear her daughter's ragged breathing and soft moans in her sleep. Marco and Isabella were curled up on either side of her, their small hands tightly clasped together as if afraid of being separated. Elena's stomach churned with hunger, the ache having dulled into numbness and now flaring back again, sharper than before. She placed a hand over her belly, where her unborn child was growing, and wondered if she was killing the baby by not eating for 2 days. But there was nothing to eat, and the remaining half-packet of instant noodles would have to be saved for the 3 children when they woke. She could not eat their share. She had no right to eat their share. She sat there in the darkness, hungry, cold, and exhausted, watching a stranger breathe weakly on her sofa and 3 children sleep on her bed. She could not sleep. She did not dare sleep, afraid that Sophia might convulse in the night or that the man might stop breathing if she looked away. So she stayed awake, sitting there through the night, keeping watch over 4 lives that had somehow become her responsibility. Her eyelids felt weighted with lead, her head spun from hunger and lack of sleep, and each time her eyes threatened to close, she slapped her own face to stay awake. She had to stay awake. She had to watch. She was the only one still standing in this room, and if she fell, there would be no one left. The first light of dawn began to slip through the torn curtains, and Elena was still sitting there, back against the wall, eyes wide open and staring into nothingness. She had survived another night, but she did not know how many more nights like this she could endure. Dominic Aurelio opened his eyes, and the first thing he realized was that he was still alive. The second was that he was lying on an old sofa that smelled of damp and decay inside a room he had never seen before. The weak light of dawn slipped through a torn, tattered curtain, just enough for him to take in his surroundings. The apartment was so small he could see every corner simply by turning his head, a single room serving as living room, bedroom, and kitchen all at once, with a narrow door leading to what he assumed was the bathroom. The walls were flaking with yellowed paint, the ceiling stained with spreading watermarks, the plywood floor warped and cracked. He had been to the worst slums of Chicago in the course of his work, but never had he found himself lying in a place like this as the one being sheltered. He tried to push himself up and pain tore through his abdomen, forcing him to grit his teeth to keep from groaning. He looked down and saw that his wounds had been carefully bandaged, not expertly, but effectively. The white gauze tinged pink with seeped blood, yet no longer pouring as it had the night before. Someone had saved him. Someone had cut the bullet out of his body and stitched him closed. His memories returned slowly, fragment by fragment: the ambush, the gunfire, the blood, the rain, his 2 children trembling in his arms, and a woman, dark brown eyes filled with fear yet unwilling to run, small hands shaking yet still pulling him upright, a hoarse but resolute voice saying she would help. Where were Marco and Isabella? Dominic's heart clenched with panic, and he turned his head, then released a breath when he saw his children sleeping peacefully on the small bed in the corner, curled beside another child he did not recognize. All 3 were wrapped together beneath a thin blanket, their faces calm in sleep, as if the night before had never happened. Then he saw her. The woman was sitting on the floor against the wall beside the bed, her head slumped toward her chest but her eyes still half open, the kind of restless dozing of someone who had forced herself to stay awake all night, only to be betrayed by her body. In the daylight, Dominic saw her clearly for the first time, and what he saw stunned him. She was thin, not the refined slenderness of the models and actresses he saw at elite parties, but the thinness of hunger, the thinness of prolonged deprivation, the kind that made cheekbones jut sharply beneath sallow skin, and eyes sink deep like dark hollows in an exhausted face. She was young, perhaps not yet 30, but weariness made her look far older than her years. Her long black hair was tangled and still soaked, not yet dry, her worn clothes clinging to her like a second skin, dried blood staining her hands and sleeves. His blood. Dominic looked around the apartment again, this time noticing the details. The ancient refrigerator in the corner stood slightly open, and he could clearly see that it was empty. Nothing inside but bare shelves and darkness. On the kitchen table lay piles of bills, and he recognized the unmistakable colors of overdue utility notices, medical bills, rent demands, and in the middle of them all was a bright red sheet he knew well, an eviction notice. This woman, the woman who had saved his life and the lives of his 2 children, was living in a level of poverty he had never once faced. She had no money for food, no money for rent, was about to be thrown onto the street, and yet she had dragged him here, cut the bullet from his body, stayed awake all night watching over him and his children. Why? Dominic could not understand it. In his world, no one did anything without a purpose. No one helped another without expecting something in return. But this woman, what could she possibly demand from him when she did not even know who he was? To her, he was just a bleeding stranger in a dark alley, a burden, a complication, a danger. And yet she had not walked away. She stirred and opened her eyes, perhaps sensing his gaze. Her dark brown eyes met his black ones, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then she looked toward the bed to check on the sleeping children before turning back to him. "You are awake," she said, her voice rough with exhaustion. "How do you feel?" Dominic opened his mouth to say something, to thank her, to ask a question, to say anything at all, but no words came. He, the most powerful mafia boss in East Chicago, a man who had ordered the executions of dozens of traitors without a tremor, was lying here on the torn sofa of a destitute woman whose name he did not even know, and for the first time in his life, he did not know what to say. Elena did not answer the man's question, but stood up and walked to the bed to check on Sophia, her daughter still feverish, her forehead burning beneath Elena's palm, though it seemed slightly less severe than the night before, while Marco and Isabella remained fast asleep, their angelic faces peaceful as if nothing terrible had ever happened. Elena turned back toward the man on the sofa and realized she still did not know his name, that she had spent the entire night cutting out a bullet, stitching wounds, and keeping watch over a complete stranger she knew nothing about except that he wore expensive clothes and had 2 young children. "What is your name?" she asked, her voice still hoarse with exhaustion. The man studied her for a long moment before answering. "Dominic. Nothing more. No surname. No explanation." Elena nodded and was about to turn away when her eyes caught something on the floor near the sofa, a black leather wallet that must have slipped from his pocket when she dragged him onto the couch the night before. She bent down to pick it up with the intention of returning it, but the instant it touched her hand, she knew something was wrong. The wallet was far too expensive. Not an ordinary leather wallet, but one made of fine, supple leather so smooth. Elena had never touched anything like it in her life. She had no intention of looking. She truly had not. But the wallet was already open, and the first thing she saw was a glossy black business card with silver lettering, Dominic Aurelio, and beneath the name a symbol Elena recognized instantly, though she wished she did not. A serpent coiled around a sword, the emblem of the Aurelio family. The blood seemed to freeze in her veins. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, no, that cannot be." But she knew it was true. Because who in Chicago did not know the name Dominic Aurelio, the youngest mafia boss in the city's history, the man who inherited the empire from his father at 25 and turned it into the most feared power on the East Side in less than a decade? People said he had killed his first man at 16, that he once ordered a traitor's hand cut off and mailed to the man's family 1 finger at a time over the course of a week, that he could smile while ordering an execution without his hand ever shaking. The devil in an Armani suit, the newspapers called him, and Elena had just brought that devil into her home, where her daughter was sleeping. She looked up at Dominic and saw him watching her, his black eyes utterly unreadable, as if he had been waiting for this moment, perhaps knowing she would discover the truth the instant she picked up the wallet. Elena took a step back, her survival instinct screaming at her to run, to grab her child and flee as far away from this monster as possible. But she knew there was nowhere to run. He knew where she lived. He had been inside her home, and if even half the rumors about his cruelty were true, running would only make things worse. "You are Aurelio," she said, her voice reduced to a whisper. "You are the Aurelio mafia boss." Dominic did not deny it, did not explain, did not say a word. He simply met her gaze with those bottomless black eyes and gave a single nod. "My father," Elena said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "My father died because of the Mafia. He worked for one of the gangs in Chicago when I was 12, and one day he went to work and never came home. They found his body in a dark alley, 2 bullets to the head, not a dollar left in his pocket. My mother had to raise me alone after that, working 3 jobs a day until she fell ill, and now she is lying in a hospital waiting to die because I cannot afford the medical bills. All the suffering in my life, all of it, started with the Mafia, with men like the one lying on my sofa, and now I have saved the life of one of those demons." Elena glanced at the bed where Sophia slept, her daughter, the one innocent reason she still wanted to live, lying right beside the children of a Mafia boss. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to throw this man out of her home immediately, even if he died on the street. But then she looked at Marco and Isabella, 2 5-year-old children sleeping peacefully, unaware of the monster their father was said to be. Children who had already lost their mother and nearly lost their father in a single night. They are not guilty, a voice whispered inside her. They are just children, like Sophia, like she herself had been when she lost her father. They did not choose who their father was. Elena stood there in the cramped room, the expensive leather wallet still in her hand, her eyes moving from the man on the sofa to the 3 children on the bed, her heart torn in two between hatred and compassion. She hated the Mafia, hated everything connected to that criminal world, but she could not hate innocent children, and she could not watch a father die in front of his children no matter who that father was. "You have 2 minutes to explain why I should not call the police right now," Elena said, her voice cold as ice even as fear shook her from the inside. "And you had better tell me the truth, because I swear to you, if you lie to me once, just once, I will call the police, even if it means those 2 children will lose their father." Dominic looked at Elena with an expression she could not read. Then he opened his mouth and began to speak, telling her about the ambush the night before, about how his own younger brother Victor had betrayed him and led men to kill all 3 of them in order to seize control of the Aurelio Empire, telling her about his wife Catalina, who had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, an accident he was now certain Victor had arranged, telling her that he could trust no one inside the organization because he did not know who had chosen his brother's side, that if he went to a hospital or called the police, Victor would find him and this time would make sure he did not survive. He said all of it in a low, even voice, without emotion, as if he were delivering a business report rather than explaining how his own blood had tried to have him murdered. Elena listened in silence, her face giving nothing away while turmoil raged inside her. She did not know whether to believe him, did not know how much of what he said was truth, but one thing she knew with absolute certainty was that she did not want to be involved in any of this. "You have to leave," Elena said when Dominic stopped speaking. "Right now. I do not care whether your brother wants to kill you or you want to kill your brother. That is your problem, not mine. I saved your life once, and that is enough. You need to go." Dominic looked at her and tried to sit up, but the moment he lifted himself, his face drained of color and he collapsed back onto the sofa, one hand clutching the wound in his abdomen where blood was seeping through the bandages. He was too weak. He had lost too much blood, and no matter how extraordinary his endurance was, the human body still had limits. Elena knew that. She had seen it when she cut the bullet from his body the night before, but she did not want to admit it. She did not want to admit that if she forced him out now, he would die before he made it out of her building. "You cannot stay here," she said, her voice weakening despite her effort to keep it firm. "I have a daughter. I cannot have my child living under the same roof as a Mafia boss." A small sound from the bed made both Elena and Dominic turn their heads. Marco was awake and sitting on the bed, looking at them with the same large dark eyes as his father. He said nothing, simply climbed down and walked over to Elena, taking her hand in both of his small ones. "Miss," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Miss, please do not send my dad away. He is hurt. He will die if you send him away." Elena looked down at the child and felt her heart tighten until it hurt. She wanted to say it was not her responsibility, that she did not owe his father anything, that she had already done enough, but the words died in her throat when Isabella woke as well and ran toward her. The little girl did not take Elena's hand like her brother but wrapped both arms around her leg, looking up with tear-filled eyes. "Miss," Isabella whispered, her voice barely more than breath, "are you an angel? Mommy said before she went to heaven that angels would protect me and Marco. Are you the angel Mommy sent to save our dad?" Tears spilled from Elena's eyes even though she did not want to cry. She was not an angel. She was just a broken woman trying to survive one day at a time. A single mother with no money to buy medicine for her feverish daughter, a daughter herself, with no money to pay hospital bills for a dying mother. She was not capable of saving anyone. She could not even save herself. But when she looked down at the 2 children clinging to her as if she were their only lifeline, when she saw the hope in their eyes, she could not say no. She thought of Sophia, thought of a day when her own daughter might kneel and beg a stranger to save her life, and what she would want that stranger to say. "I am not an angel," Elena whispered, her voice breaking. "I am just an ordinary person, but I will not send your father away, at least not until he is strong enough to leave on his own. All right?" Marco and Isabella nodded, tears still streaming down their cheeks but smiles breaking through. The first smiles Elena had seen on their faces since she found them in the rain that night. She looked up at Dominic and saw him watching her with an expression she could not understand. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and hoarse. Elena did not answer. She did not want his thanks. She did not want his gratitude. She only wanted her miserable, ordinary life back, but she knew that was no longer possible. She had stepped into the world of demons, and now she had no idea how to step back out. That night, when the 3 children were sleeping soundly on the narrow bed, and the apartment had sunk into darkness with only the faint glow of streetlights slipping through the torn curtains, Dominic began to tell Elena the true story of his life. She sat on the floor beside the bed, her back against the wall, her eyes fixed on the sleeping children, while her ears absorbed every word he spoke. Dominic lay on the sofa, his voice low and unhurried, as if each word carried its own weight. He spoke of Catalina, his wife, the only woman he had ever loved. She was not from a Mafia family, he said, his gaze lifted toward the ceiling as though staring into a distant past. She had been an elementary school teacher, meeting him in a cafe when he slipped away from a tedious meeting. She had not known who he was, had not known what his family did, and by the time she learned the truth, she loved him too deeply to walk away. Elena listened in silence, never imagining that a ruthless Mafia boss like Dominic could speak of his wife with such tenderness. Catalina gave him 2 children, Marco and Isabella, and during the first 4 years of fatherhood, Dominic tried to distance himself from the darkest parts of the family business. He wanted to build a cleaner life for his wife and children, to slowly move into legitimate enterprises, to one day look his children in the eyes without shame. But his younger brother Victor did not want that. Victor wanted to expand the empire at any cost, to plunge deeper into more dangerous and darker dealings. The brothers began to clash, the arguments growing more violent, and then Catalina died. Dominic fell silent for a long time after saying that, and in the darkness Elena could see his jaw clenched tight. "They said it was an accident," he continued, his voice hardening. "Her car lost control while she was picking the children up from preschool and plunged into a ravine. Marco and Isabella were in the car, but by some miracle they survived with only minor injuries. Catalina did not." He paused and drew a deep breath, as though trying to contain a pain that was still raw even after 2 years. "I believed it was an accident," he said. "I was broken. I collapsed. I let Victor take more control of the organization because I no longer had the strength to care. But a month ago, I discovered the truth by chance. Catalina's brakes had been cut, and the person who ordered it was Victor." Elena's mouth fell open in shock despite her effort to remain silent. A brother killing his sister-in-law for power sounded impossible. But when she saw the pain and hatred in Dominic's eyes, she knew he was not lying. "Victor wanted me destroyed," Dominic said. "He knew Catalina was my only weakness, and he used it. While I was grieving, he slowly seized power, bought the loyalty of my closest people, and built his own faction. He thought I knew nothing, but I uncovered everything. And last night," Elena whispered. "What was last night?" "Last night was when I planned to strike first," Dominic replied. "I had arranged to eliminate Victor and those loyal to him, but he was faster. He knew I had learned the truth about Catalina's death and decided to kill me before I could take revenge. He set the ambush while I was taking my children home from a friend's house. I killed the assassins but was badly wounded, and I could not go anywhere safe because I did not know who in the organization was still loyal to me and who had chosen Victor's side." Elena sat in silence, her mind spinning with everything she had just heard. Dominic's story sounded like a Mafia film she might have seen on television, filled with betrayal, hatred, and blood. But this was not a film. This was reality, and she was sitting right in the middle of it. "I need 1 week," Dominic said, his voice no longer that of a commanding boss but of a desperate father pleading. 1 week for my wounds to heal enough for me to move, to contact Lorenzo, the only person I trust completely, to find out who is still loyal and who has betrayed me. After 1 week, I will leave and you will never have to see me again." 1 week, Elena repeated, her voice heavy with doubt. "You think a wound like that can heal in 1 week?" "I have survived worse," Dominic answered, "and I have no other choice. If I stay here too long, Victor will find me, and then not only I will die, but you and your daughter will die as well for helping me." Elena shuddered at the warning, knowing he was right. She was already too deeply involved. She had saved the life of Victor Aurelio's enemy, and in Victor's eyes, she was now an enemy too. 1 week, she said at last, her voice tired and resigned. "You have 1 week, no more. You stay in this apartment, you do not go outside, you do not contact anyone except the person you trust, and you do nothing that puts my daughter and me in danger. Do you understand?" Dominic nodded, and in the darkness, Elena saw something flicker in his eyes. Perhaps gratitude, perhaps respect, or perhaps only the reflection of the streetlight. "Thank you," he said for the second time that day. "I will not forget this." Elena did not answer. She stood and went to the bed where the 3 children slept, lay down beside Sophia, and pulled her daughter into her arms. She closed her eyes but could not sleep, her thoughts racing through the week ahead, through the Mafia boss lying on her sofa, through the brother hunting him across the city, and through the fact that she had placed herself and her daughter in the middle of a brutal war for control of a criminal empire. The next morning, Elena was trying to cook the remaining half-packet of instant noodles for 5 people. Dominic called her over and made an offer. "I will pay off all your debts," he said calmly, as if he were commenting on the weather. "Your rent, your mother's hospital bills, the medicine for your daughter, everything. In return, you hide me and the children for 1 week." Elena stopped stirring the pot and turned to look at him with eyes as cold as ice. "No," she said firmly. "I will not take Mafia money." Dominic raised an eyebrow, seemingly surprised by her answer. "You are about to be evicted," he said. "Your mother is waiting to die in the hospital because you cannot afford the bills. Your daughter is burning with fever, and you do not even have a single pill to bring it down. You would rather die than take my money." "Yes," Elena replied without hesitation. "I would rather die than take blood-stained money. My father died because of the Mafia, and I will not let the money of men like you enter my daughter's life." Dominic watched her in silence for a long moment, and in those dark eyes there was something Elena could not decipher. It might have been anger at being refused, it might have been contempt for her foolishness, or it might have been a trace of respect for her stubborn integrity. He said nothing more, and Elena turned back to finish cooking the watery noodles to divide among the 5 of them. That day passed in a tense silence. Elena went to work her afternoon shift at the Chinese restaurant because she could not afford to miss another day without losing her job. She left Dominic to watch the 3 children, a thought that terrified her, but she had no other choice. Mrs. Chen next door was too old to handle 3 energetic children, and Elena had no money to hire a babysitter. When she returned home close to midnight, everything seemed peaceful. Marco and Isabella were asleep on the bed with Sophia, and Dominic was sitting on the sofa reading an old book she could not remember owning. Then Sophia began to moan in her sleep, and Elena realized her daughter's fever had spiked again. She rushed to the bed and placed her hand on Sophia's forehead, her heart clenching as she felt the scorching heat like burning coals. She tried to wake her daughter, but Sophia did not respond, her eyes shut tight and her body beginning to tremble in an unnatural way. Then the worst happened. Sophia had a seizure, her small body arched like a bow, her limbs jerking violently, white foam forming at the corners of her mouth, her eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. Elena screamed in terror, not knowing what to do, only clutching her daughter and crying. "Sophia, sweetheart, wake up. Mommy is begging you. Wake up." Dominic was beside her instantly, pushing her aside and swiftly turning Sophia onto her side so she would not choke. Elena flinched at his sudden movement, but had no time to protest, as he scooped Sophia up and ran for the door. "Follow me," he shouted over his shoulder. "Where's the nearest clinic?" Elena followed him like an automaton, stammering directions to the 24-hour clinic 4 blocks away. She did not have time to think about the fact that Dominic had been shot only 2 days earlier, did not have time to think that his wounds were not healed, did not have time to think of anything except her daughter convulsing in the arms of a Mafia boss. Dominic ran as if nothing could stop him, both arms locked around Sophia, his stride steady, even as Elena saw blood beginning to seep from the bandage on his abdomen, soaking through his shirt and dripping onto the street. He did not stop, did not slow, did not utter a single groan, though the pain must have been like knives. 4 blocks, less than 10 minutes at that frantic pace, and they reached the clinic. Dominic kicked the door open and demanded a doctor in a commanding voice no one dared defy. Nurses rushed forward at once, pulling Sophia from his arms and taking her into the emergency room. Elena tried to follow but was stopped at the door, left standing there staring through the small glass window, tears streaming down her face as doctors worked around her daughter's motionless body. She did not know how much time passed, minutes or hours, but at last a doctor came out and told her Sophia was out of danger. She had a severe infection from untreated pneumonia, the doctor explained sternly. If you had arrived even a few minutes later, we might not have been able to save her. She needs to be hospitalized for at least 1 week and treated with high-dose antibiotics. Elena nodded like a machine, not daring to ask about the cost because she knew she could not afford it. She would think of a solution later. What mattered now was that Sophia was alive. She turned to thank Dominic, but he was no longer standing behind her. She looked around and saw him sitting in a chair in the corner of the waiting room, one hand pressed tightly to the wound in his abdomen where blood was seeping through his shirt, his face white as paper but his dark eyes fixed on her without blinking. He had run 4 blocks with a bleeding gunshot wound to save her daughter, a child he had no obligation to care about. Elena walked over to him, and for the first time since learning who he was, she looked at him without fear or hatred. "Why?" she asked in a whisper. "Why did you do that?" Dominic looked at her for a long moment before answering, and his reply was so simple it made Elena want to cry. "Because you saved my children," he said, "and because I know what it is like to lose the person you love most." Sophia was discharged after 3 days thanks to high-dose antibiotics and the devoted care of the doctors. And Elena did not ask who had paid the hospital bills because she already knew the answer, and this time she did not refuse, because she had no right to refuse when her daughter's life was the price of her pride. When they returned to the small apartment, the strangest life Elena had ever imagined began. 6 people crowded into a space of less than 30 square meters, a mafia boss being hunted for his life, his 5-year-old twin children, a 27-year-old pregnant single mother, her 8-year-old daughter just recovered from illness, and occasionally the 73-year-old neighbor Mrs. Chen stopping by to help. Everything should have been chaotic and suffocating. Yet, strangely, this run-down apartment began to have something it had never had before: laughter. Sophia, Marco, and Isabella quickly became inseparable. Sophia, 3 years older than the twins, naturally became the leader, inventing games from whatever they could find in the house. They built castles out of empty cardboard boxes, played hide-and-seek in an apartment so small there was nowhere to hide, drew pictures on the backs of cheap flyers, and laughed as if the outside world did not exist. Elena often stood in the corner of the kitchen watching the 3 children play, tears threatening to spill. She could not remember the last time she had heard Sophia laugh like that, the clear, unburdened laughter of an 8-year-old who should have laughed like this every day but whose childhood had been stolen by poverty. Now, thanks to 2 children from a completely different world, her daughter was allowed to be a normal child, if only for a short while. Dominic, however, was an entirely different story. The most powerful mafia boss in East Chicago, a man whose single nod could erase dozens of lives, was now struggling in the tiny kitchen trying to learn how to cook instant noodles without burning the pot. Elena had burst out laughing the first time she saw him standing at the gas stove with the lost expression of a child, holding a packet of noodles and staring at it as if it were a new weapon he did not know how to use. She had thought cooking instant noodles was impossible to mess up, until Dominic poured water into the pot before turning on the stove, and wondered why it had not boiled after 2 minutes. She had to teach him from the beginning, how to light the burner, how to measure the water, when to add the noodles, how to season them. He learned with an intensity that was absurd, dark eyes focused as if studying an important strategic plan, rather than learning to cook a cheap packet of noodles. Then there was laundry. Elena had no washing machine and washed everything by hand in an old plastic basin. When Dominic asked where the washing machine was and she pointed to the basin, his face became a portrait of culture shock. He had never washed clothes by hand in his life, had never had to do anything domestic because servants had always handled it. But when Elena was at work and the children dirtied all their clothes while playing, he had no choice but to do it himself. Elena came home that day to find Dominic Aurelio, the notoriously ruthless mafia boss, kneeling over the plastic basin with hands full of soap suds, trying to wring out one of Isabella's small shirts, his face twisted as if he were being tortured. She laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in longer than she could remember, and the sound made Dominic look up at her, his expression caught between irritation and confusion. "Is it really that funny?" he asked, trying and failing to sound dignified. "Yes," Elena replied, still laughing. "It really is." He studied her for a moment, then laughed as well, a low, rough sound as if he had forgotten what laughter felt like. It was the first time Elena had seen him laugh, and she realized that when Dominic Aurelio laughed, he did not look like a devil at all. He looked like an ordinary man trying to adapt to a life he had never imagined he would be living. On the 5th night since Dominic arrived, his wound had healed enough for him to walk normally, though the pain was still there, and Elena suggested they take a walk around the neighborhood after dark, partly because she needed to breathe after days trapped in the cramped apartment, and partly because she wanted to show him something she was certain he had never seen in a life wrapped in velvet and violence. They left the 3 children with Mrs. Chen, and slipped outside once night had fully fallen, moving through the quiet streets of the poor district where Elena had lived for 5 years. Dominic wore an old hoodie Elena had bought from a thrift store for $2. The hood pulled low to hide a face that someone might recognize. He looked like an ordinary man now, stripped of the danger and authority of a mafia boss, just a man walking beside a woman through the cold night. Elena led him through dark alleys where homeless children curled up inside cardboard boxes, showing him dirt-smeared faces and eyes made old by hardship on children not yet 10 years old, who were already surviving alone on the streets. She took him past the 24-hour diner where single mothers worked night shifts with hollow eyes from lack of sleep, women like her juggling 3 jobs a day just to feed their children. She showed him elderly people huddled on park benches with nowhere to go, alcoholics trembling through withdrawal because they could not afford treatment, young girls standing on street corners with empty eyes, selling their bodies for a meal. Dominic was silent the entire way, not a single word. Elena did not speak either. She only walked, and let him see, let him feel. "This is the real world," she finally said when they stopped in front of a graffiti-covered wall painted with crying children. "Not the world inside your mansion, not the world of lavish parties or million-dollar deals. This is where people like me live, people you never see, people who are invisible to the rich and powerful like you." Dominic still said nothing, only stared at the wall with its crude yet haunting drawings. Elena continued, her voice not angry but tired and sad. "You know those homeless children. Some of them are orphans because their fathers died in gang wars. Those single mothers, some of them lost their husbands because they got involved with the Mafia and were killed. Those girls on the street, some of them were forced into it by networks that might even be controlled by your organization. Do you understand what I am saying? Every decision made by people like you, every bullet, every turf war, has consequences, and those consequences do not fall on the heads of bosses in mansions. They fall on people like me, like those children, like those women." Dominic turned to look at her, and under the weak streetlight Elena could see that his dark eyes were no longer as cold as before. Something had changed there, not guilt, because she knew a man like Dominic did not feel guilt easily, but perhaps awareness, an understanding of a part of the world he had chosen to ignore for years. "Do you hate me?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "I do not know," Elena answered honestly. "I hate what you represent. I hate the world you live in. I hate what the Mafia has done to my life and my family. But you, the person you are, I do not know anymore whether I should hate you." Dominic nodded as if that were the answer he had expected. They stood there in silence for a long time, 2 people from completely different worlds staring at the same wall filled with pain. Then Dominic did something Elena never expected. He removed the expensive watch from his wrist, the last remnant of his former life, stepped forward, and placed it into the hand of a homeless boy dozing on the sidewalk. The boy jolted awake and stared at him in fear, but Dominic only nodded and walked away. That watch was worth a year of her rent, and he had given it away without a word. Elena watched him disappear into the darkness beside her and wondered whether she had misjudged this man from the beginning, or whether he was changing right before her eyes. On the 6th day, Elena came home earlier than usual because her shift at the restaurant had been canceled when the owner shut the place down to fix the plumbing, and she climbed the 3 flights of stairs with weary steps but a lighter heart at the thought of resting a little sooner. Yet when she reached the apartment door, she heard Dominic's voice coming from inside, low and cold as steel. And she stopped, her hand hovering on the doorknob as his words carried clearly through the thin door, telling someone to find out who had leaked his schedule that night and to deal with him, saying he did not care whether the man had a family or what his reasons were. That betrayal demanded death, ordering Lorenzo to make sure the execution would serve as a warning to anyone who dared betray the Aurelio family. And Elena stood frozen in the hallway, her fingers trembling, her blood turning to ice as everything she had begun to forget over the past days came rushing back. The man clumsily cooking instant noodles, the man laughing with children, the man giving away an expensive watch, all shattered by the reminder of who he truly was. A mafia boss, a killer, the devil she had foolishly believed might be redeemed. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, her eyes locking onto Dominic sitting on the sofa with the phone still in his hand. And he looked up at her and knew instantly that she had heard everything, offering no explanation, no justification, only that unreadable gaze as if bracing for her judgment. And when he began to say her name, she cut him off, telling him to get out, her voice shaking with anger and disappointment as she ordered him to leave her home immediately. saying she did not care where he went or whether his brother killed him, only that she wanted him out of her life. Dominic rose slowly, his wound nearly healed, but his movements still careful, and he studied her for a long moment before asking with terrifying calm what she had heard, and Elena nearly shouted that she had heard him ordering a man's death, heard him speaking of turning murder into a warning, calling him a monster, the devil people whispered about, while glancing anxiously toward the corner where the 3 children stood watching in fear. Dominic did not deny it, standing there with an expressionless gaze, as he stated evenly that he had never claimed not to be a monster, never pretended to be a good man, admitting he had killed and would kill again, that this was his world, his life, the only way to protect what he loved, asking whether she truly believed a few days of cooking noodles and washing clothes by hand could turn a mafia boss into an ordinary man. Tears rose to Elena's eyes and she wiped them away roughly, unsure whether they came from anger or shattered hope, realizing she had allowed herself to believe, if only briefly, that there was something better, more human, within Dominic Aurelio, only to see that hope collapse. Dominic continued, explaining that the man he had ordered killed was the one who sold his schedule to Victor, the reason for the ambush, the reason he nearly died, the reason Marco and Isabella nearly lost their father, asking what she would do if she were in his place, and Elena could not answer, hating violence and everything he represented, yet haunted by the thought of what she herself might do if someone threatened Sophia, the uncertainty frightening her more than the man before her. In his world, Dominic said as he stepped closer, it was kill or be killed, with no third choice, and he did not expect her understanding or forgiveness, only that she know he killed only those who threatened his family or betrayed him, that he did not harm innocents, women, or children, that he did not kill for pleasure, admitting it did not make him a good man, but insisting it did not make him the monster she believed. Elena stared at him and felt a terrifying truth settle in her chest, that she no longer knew what to think of him, that she hated his actions yet could not fully hate him, feared him yet felt strangely safe near him, wanted him gone, yet felt something inside her resist his leaving, her heart torn apart by conflicting emotions she could not escape. Then Marco's small voice broke the tension as he stood in the middle of the room, holding Isabella's and Sophia's hands, asking whether his father and Elena were fighting and whether his father had to leave. And Dominic looked at his son, and then at Elena, a flash of pain crossing his eyes before vanishing. And he spoke again, his voice softer now, almost pleading, asking her to let him stay just one more day, saying Lorenzo would come for him and the children the next day, and after that she would never have to see him again. Elena looked at the 3 children standing hand in hand, then back at Dominic, knowing she should force him out immediately, sever all ties with his dark world before it consumed her, yet unable to do so in front of the children, unable to watch Marco and Isabella lose their father again. And at last she agreed, her voice cold as ice while her heart shattered, granting him one more day and no more, telling him that after that she wanted him gone from her life forever. Elena turned away, intending to retreat into the bathroom to cry alone, but she had barely taken 2 steps when the world began to spin, bright spots dancing wildly before her eyes, her mind going blank as if all the blood had been drained from her body at once, and her legs buckling without warning. She heard someone shout her name. Maybe Sophia, maybe Marco, maybe Dominic himself, but she could not tell because darkness swallowed her before she hit the floor. When Elena opened her eyes, she found herself lying on a stark white hospital bed, with intravenous lines taped into her arm, the harsh fluorescent lights forcing her to squint as she tried to piece together what had happened. The apartment, the argument, Dominic, the order to kill, and then nothing. She tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pressed her back down. Do not try to move. The familiar low voice made her turn her head and see Dominic sitting in the chair beside her bed, his face more exhausted and strained than she had ever seen it, even when he had been shot and bleeding to death in a dark alley. Where are the children? Elena asked immediately, her maternal instinct overriding everything else. With Mrs. Chen, Dominic replied. They are safe. Do not worry. Elena exhaled in relief, then looked around, trying to understand. Where was she? Why was she in a hospital? She had only fainted. She had fainted many times over the past days from hunger and exhaustion, and always woken up on her own after a few seconds. Why was this time different? Do you know you are pregnant? Dominic asked, his voice strange. No longer cold but not warm either, something Elena could not name. She froze, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach, where the 4-month-old child she had kept hidden from everyone was growing. I know, she whispered. It was her secret, her fear, the burden she carried alone. The child's father, a former boyfriend who had vanished when he learned of the pregnancy, taking her last savings with him, leaving her with no money for prenatal care, no vitamins, no preparation for the baby's arrival, not even knowing whether the child was healthy because she had never had an ultrasound. "Why did you not tell anyone?" Dominic asked, and there was something like anger in his voice. "Why did you let yourself get like this? Do you know you almost died? Both you and the baby nearly died because you refused to eat properly." Elena closed her eyes, not wanting to see his expression, not wanting his judgment or his pity. "What did the doctor say?" she asked faintly. Dominic was silent for a long moment before answering, and each word he spoke felt like a stone pressing down on her chest. Severe malnutrition, acute anemia, extreme exhaustion. "The doctor said if this continues, both mother and child could die. The baby is developing too slowly, due to lack of nutrients, and your body has been drained to the point that it can barely sustain itself, let alone support another life. They had to administer fluids and emergency injections to stabilize you." Elena lay there in silence, tears sliding down to her temples and soaking into the pillow. She had known for a long time that she could not keep going like this, but she had no other choice. She had to work to earn money, had to give food to Sophia because her daughter was sick, had to try to pay debts and hospital bills for her mother. There was no time to think of herself, no money to care for herself. She was just a woman trying to survive one day at a time, and now her body had surrendered before she could fix anything. "Why?" she heard herself ask, her voice breaking. "Why do you care? You are leaving tomorrow. You will go back to your world and forget me like dust. Why are you here?" Dominic did not answer right away. He simply sat there, looking at her with dark eyes that were no longer cold, holding something Elena was afraid to name. Then he reached out and wiped the tears from her cheek, with fingers rough yet unexpectedly gentle. "Because you saved my life," he said, his voice low and hoarse. "Because you cared for my children as if they were your own. Because you are the strongest and most foolish woman I have ever met. And because I will not let you die, not when there is still something I can do to stop it." Elena was kept in the hospital for 2 days to receive intravenous fluids and to monitor the condition of her unborn child. And during those 2 days, Dominic did not leave as he had said he would, but stayed by her side, sitting on the hard chair next to her bed and refusing every suggestion that he go home to rest, while Mrs. Chen brought the 3 children to visit every day and Sophia clung to her mother in tears, asking why Mommy was in the hospital and whether she was going to die like Grandma, forcing Elena to smile through the pain and reassure her daughter that Mommy was only a little tired and would be better soon. Yet that night, after Sophia had been taken home and only Elena and Dominic remained in the hospital room, she received a call from the hospital where her mother was being treated for cancer, her hand shaking as she lifted the phone, her heart tightening in terror that they were calling to say her mother had died because Elena could not pay the bills and treatment had been stopped. But what she heard instead left her frozen, the nurse's voice bright and professional informing her that all of her mother's medical expenses had been paid in full, that her mother had been transferred to a private room, and that a top oncology specialist would personally oversee her care starting that day, inviting her to call if she had any questions. And Elena sat motionless on the hospital bed, unable to speak, turning to Dominic and seeing him looking out the window with a blank expression as if none of it concerned him, though she knew there was only one person who could have done this, whispering his name with a trembling voice and asking what he had done, while Dominic did not turn back, continuing to stare into the night sky beyond the glass, as he replied calmly that he had paid her mother's hospital bills and hired the best doctors available, that cancer at such an advanced stage could not be cured, but at least her mother would not suffer and would be cared for with dignity in her final days, leaving Elena unable to form words as emotion tightened her throat, asking softly if there was anything else, and Dominic finally turning to her with eyes softer than she had ever seen, telling her he had paid off her rent and all her debts, arranged for food to fill her refrigerator, prenatal milk, vitamins, and everything a pregnant woman would need, promising that when she was discharged, she would return to a clean apartment with food, stability, and no debts hanging over her head. And when Elena asked why, tears finally breaking free despite her efforts, asking why he would do all this, when she had refused his money, ordered him to leave, and spoken harshly to him, Dominic moved closer and sat on the edge of her bed, nearer than ever before, meeting her gaze and speaking with quiet certainty that this was not a deal, not a transaction, not payment for hiding him or saving his life. but something he chose to do, because for the first time in his life, he had met someone who wanted nothing from him, someone who would rather die than take his money for the sake of her principles, someone who gave everything she had to him and his children while having nothing herself. Someone who looked at him as a father rather than a mafia boss, even if only for a few brief days, saying he did not do this to make her owe him, but because he could not watch her die, could not watch her unborn child die, and could not watch Sofia lose her mother the way Marco and Isabella had lost Catalina. And at that, Elena finally broke, crying in a way she had never allowed herself to cry through years of standing alone, carrying everything alone, pretending she was fine while the world crushed her, crying because for the first time someone cared for her without demanding anything in return, because for the first time someone saw her fading away and chose to save her instead of turning away, because for the first time she was allowed to be weak and to fall knowing someone would catch her, while Dominic said nothing and simply stayed beside her, letting her cry, until at last he pulled her into his arms and held her the way he held Marco and Isabella when they were afraid, Elena's sobs breaking freely against his chest in the quiet hospital room as Dominic held her tighter, one hand gently stroking her hair, speaking no words because his presence alone was enough. And in that moment, the ruthless mafia boss and the impoverished woman were no longer roles or labels, but simply two human beings clinging to each other in a world that had been unbearably cruel to them both. Elena was discharged in the afternoon of the 8th day, and when she returned to the apartment she could hardly believe her eyes. The old refrigerator had been replaced by a new one filled to the brim with food, fresh vegetables and fruit, meat and fish, prenatal milk, and every kind of nourishing ingredient she had never dared to dream of. Prenatal vitamins and iron supplements prescribed by the doctor sat neatly on the kitchen table. The pile of unpaid bills had vanished, replaced by a stack of receipts, proving every debt had been fully paid. The glaring red eviction notice was gone, and she knew that meant she no longer had to live in fear of being thrown onto the street. The 3 children rushed to her the moment she stepped inside, Sofia clinging to her mother and refusing to let go, Marco and Isabella holding onto her sides as if afraid she might disappear, while Dominic stood in the corner watching her with an unreadable expression, and when their eyes met she could only nod in silent thanks, unable to find words. That night, for the first time in many months, the small apartment was filled with laughter and the smell of hot food. Elena cooked the most generous meal she could manage, and the 6 of them sat crowded around the tiny table eating as if they were a real family. Mrs. Chen was invited over as well, praising the food enthusiastically, while the children competed to tell jokes, and the table rang with noise and warmth. It was the happiest evening Elena had known in years, and she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, everything might be all right. But happiness never lasted long in the life of Elena Vasquez. Around 2 in the morning, when everyone had fallen asleep, Dominic's phone rang. Elena woke instantly because she had been sleeping lightly, and she saw Dominic sit bolt upright on the sofa, his face paling in the weak glow of the screen. "Lorenzo," he said tensely. "What happened?" She could not hear the voice on the other end, but she watched Dominic's expression shift from tension to fury, and then to something she had never seen on him before. "Fear? How long?" he demanded, listening in silence before swearing under his breath in Italian. "All right, buy me some time," he said, then ended the call and turned to Elena, his dark eyes like bottomless pits in the darkness. "Victor has found us," he said, each word crushing down on her chest. "There is a traitor among the people," Lorenzo contacted. "He sold my location to Victor. His men are on their way here. In about 15 minutes they will surround this building." The blood drained from Elena's body, and she sprang from the bed as if shocked. Sofia, the children, she had to protect them. She moved to wake her daughter, but Dominic grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "Listen to me," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm despite the storm Elena knew was raging inside him. "You have to take the 4 children and leave now. There is a fire escape at the end of this hallway, leading down to the alley behind the building. Take them to Mrs. Chen's apartment downstairs. She will know what to do." "And you?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "I will stay and hold them off," Dominic replied. "No," Elena said instantly, her hand gripping his arm. "You cannot stay alone against so many men. You will die." Dominic looked at her for a long moment, then lifted his hand and gently brushed her cheek with rough fingers. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but if I do not stop them, you and the children will not have time to escape. Victor wants to kill me and my 2 children. He does not care about you and Sofia, but he will not leave witnesses. If I run with you, We will all die. If I stay, at least you have a chance to live." Elena wanted to scream, to cry that this was not fair, that she had only just begun to believe life could be better, and now it was all collapsing again. But she had no time for tears or anger. She had to be strong for the 4 children who depended on her. "Promise me," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Promise me you will survive." Dominic did not promise. He only looked at her with those dark eyes, then bent down and kissed her forehead, gentle and tender in a way that nearly broke her. "Take my children," he whispered. "Protect them for me." Then he released her and turned away, walking toward the apartment door with the steady stride of a man ready to face death. Elena swallowed her tears and ran to the bed to wake the children, her voice calm though she was shattering inside. "Wake up," she said softly but urgently. "We have to go. Now. No questions." Marco was the first to fully wake, and he looked at her with eyes just like his father's. "Where is Dad?" he asked. "He will follow us." Elena lied, and the lie burned her throat like acid. "Now follow me." Quickly, she lifted Isabella into her arms, took Sophia's and Marco's hands, and slipped out the back door. And the last time she looked back, she saw Dominic standing at the front door with a gun in his hand, his back straight and his shoulders squared, ready to face whatever was about to come through that door. And then she turned away and ran into the night with 4 children, leaving behind the man who had saved her and who might die because of her. Elena ran through the pitch-dark hallway, with Isabella clutched in her arms, and one hand locked tightly around Sophia's, her heart pounding wildly in her chest as if it might burst free, her 4-month pregnant belly slowing every step. Yet she did not dare to slow down, did not dare to think of anything except getting the 4 children to safety, while Marco ran close beside her, the small legs of the 5-year-old stretching as far as they could to keep pace with an adult, his face pale with terror, yet not a single cry escaping his lips. And when the fire escape at the end of the corridor came into view, it felt like a stairway to heaven, Elena throwing herself toward it with the last of her strength, pushing the door open and driving the children down as their footsteps rang dully against the freezing metal stairs, praying no one heard them, praying Victor's men had not sealed every exit yet, praying Dominic was still alive upstairs buying them time. And halfway down toward the 2nd floor, gunshots exploded from the direction of her apartment, the sharp cracks tearing through the silence of the night. Sophia screamed in fear and nearly fell, but Marco caught her hand in time and held on, telling her in a trembling voice he was trying to steady that she must not be afraid, that he would protect her because his father had told him to protect his little sister and the people he loved, and now Sophia was his little sister too, and he would not let anyone hurt her. Words from the mouth of a 5-year-old that nearly broke Elena yet left her no time to cry, forcing her to pull them onward down the remaining steps and across the dark alley behind the building, as the gunfire continued from the 3rd floor, each shot striking Elena's heart like a bullet because she knew Dominic was fighting alone against an unknown number of enemies, her body aching to turn back and help him yet unable to abandon the 4 children who depended on her. The distance to Mrs. Chen's apartment on the 1st floor of the neighboring building only a few dozen meters away but stretching like eternity, Elena running as fast as her exhausted body allowed, her pregnant belly rising and falling with each step, her breath breaking painfully in her chest, Isabella sobbing softly against her shoulder, while Sophia and Marco ran beside her, holding hands as if letting go would mean losing each other forever, until at last they reached Mrs. Chen's door, and Elena pounded on it in frantic desperation, shouting the elderly woman's name in a hoarse voice cracked by fear and exhaustion, begging her to open the door because it was an emergency, the door finally opening after seconds that felt like centuries to reveal the lined face of the 73-year-old neighbor, her eyes wide with shock at the sight of Elena and the 4 children, drenched in sweat and terror in the dead of night, asking what had happened as Elena pushed the children inside and spoke in rushed, broken fragments, begging her to watch them because bad people were coming and she had to go back, warning her not to let anyone take the children, and not to open the door for anyone except Elena, or a man named Lorenzo, and making her promise, Mrs. Chen nodding despite her confusion and fear, and giving her word before asking where Elena was going at such an hour, a question Elena did not answer as she dropped to her knees to hold Sophia tightly, kissing her crying daughter's forehead, and whispering that she must stay with Mrs. Chen and the younger ones, that her mother would come back, and that she was the oldest now, and had to be strong and help watch the others. Sophia nodding through tears and begging her mother not to go because she was afraid of losing her, Elena promising she would not go anywhere, though she did not know if that promise could be kept, then standing to face Marco and Isabella, clinging to Mrs. Chen, and telling them in a breaking voice to stay there and wait for their father because she would bring him back, Marco looking at her with dark eyes exactly like Dominic's, and nodding with a certainty and trust that nearly shattered her, telling her he believed her, and that she would save his father just as she had saved him on that rainy night. And before she could change her mind, Elena turned away from Mrs. Chen's apartment and ran back into the dark alley toward the building where the gunshots were still echoing through the night. Elena ran back through the dark alley with her heart pounding wildly and her head spinning with fear. She did not know what she was doing, did not know what she could possibly do against armed killers trained to kill without hesitation, but she could not abandon Dominic, not because he had saved her, not because he had paid her debts, but because Marco and Isabella needed their father, and because she had promised those children she would bring him back. And when she drew closer to her building, the gunfire had stopped, the silence far more terrifying than the explosions. She hid behind a large dumpster and watched as several shadowy figures carried an unconscious man out the back door and loaded him into a black truck. Elena's heart nearly stopped when she realized the man was Dominic. He was still alive. She could see his chest rising faintly, but he had been taken. The truck drove off, and Elena followed in the darkness, careful not to be seen, knowing she was insane, knowing that a pregnant woman chasing a Mafia crew was nothing short of suicide, yet unable to stop. The truck drove for about 10 minutes, before stopping at an old warehouse on the edge of the industrial district, and Elena recognized the place immediately. It was the warehouse where her father had once worked before he died, the place he had taken her to a few times when she was a child, and shown her secret passages he used to sneak out for cigarettes without being caught. Memories of her father flooded back, and with them one crucial detail. There was an old drainage pipe behind the warehouse, large enough for a small woman like her to crawl through, leading straight into the basement. Her father had shown it to her when she was 10, telling her that if anything ever happened, she should run through it because no one knew it existed, and she never imagined that 17 years later, she would use that knowledge to sneak into a Mafia stronghold to save a crime boss. Elena waited until the men dragged Dominic inside before moving, slipping through the shadows like a stray cat long accustomed to surviving unseen, finding the drainage pipe exactly where she remembered it, hidden behind overgrown weeds, crawling inside without hesitation despite the stench making her gag, inching through the narrow black pipe, her knees scraping painfully against rusted metal, her pregnant belly brushing the sides with every movement, yet she did not stop, thinking of Sophia, of Marco, of Isabella, of the unborn child inside her, pushing herself forward until she reached the opening into the basement, gently prying the grate loose and slipping inside. The basement dark and damp, stacked with old wooden crates and rusted machinery. Elena moving by feel, careful not to make a sound, her ears straining for voices above, hearing unfamiliar male voices and one she guessed belonged to Victor Aurelio, mocking and cruel, asking whether his brother truly believed he could hide from him, whether he thought a destitute woman could protect him forever, declaring that now Dominic was in his hands and would die slowly and painfully, just like their beloved sister-in-law. Elena grinding her teeth in fury, but forcing herself to stay calm, knowing she could not rush in headlong and confront them because she would be dead before she reached Dominic. She needed chaos, something big enough to give her a chance, her gaze locking onto the old fire alarm system mounted on the wall, realizing that if she triggered it, the sprinklers would activate and they would be forced to move. Dominic, in the confusion she might have her opening, she crept to the control box and smashed the glass with her elbow, the sharp crack making her heart leap, yanking the lever down as alarms blared throughout the building and sprinklers exploded overhead like rain, shouting and swearing echoing from above, footsteps running in every direction. Elena seizing the moment and racing up the stairs as the men panicked, weaving past bodies rushing the other way until she found Dominic in a small room at the end of the hallway, tied to a chair, his face bruised and blood at the corner of his mouth, yet his black eyes still sharp and alert, widening in shock and fury, when he saw Elena burst in with the small knife she had grabbed from the basement, roaring that she was insane and that he had told her to take the children and leave, not come back to die with him. Elena saying nothing as she focused on cutting through the ropes, binding his wrists, and when the last rope fell away, she looked up at him and spoke with a calm that surprised even herself despite the terror shaking her from within, telling him that she had promised Marco and Isabella she would bring their father home, and that she never broke promises to children. Dominic pushed himself up from the chair, his legs shaking from the torture he had endured, yet his eyes remained razor-sharp. He snatched the knife from Elena's hand and pulled her behind him, just as the door burst open, and Victor Aurelio stormed in with a gun, his face twisted with rage at the sight of his brother freed. shouting that Dominic thought he could escape, and raising the weapon. But he was a second too slow, because Dominic lunged forward with a speed Elena would never have believed possible from a man who had just been tortured, knocking the gun from Victor's hand before he could pull the trigger, the two brothers crashing into each other like wild animals, punching and grappling across the floor, slick with water from the fire suppression system. Elena frozen in place, helpless, wanting to help but not knowing how, able only to watch, as Dominic and Victor struggled over the knife, clenched in Dominic's hand. Dominic roaring that Victor had taken everything from him, had killed Catalina, had tried to kill his children, and asking how he could possibly be allowed to live. Victor screaming back that Catalina had deserved to die, that she had made Dominic weak and made him forget who he was, that without her Dominic would have remained the invincible Aurelio boss, but that he had chosen her over their father's empire, and now had to pay for that choice. Dominic saying nothing more, twisting with brutal finality, and driving the knife into Victor's chest while staring straight into his brother's eyes, Victor's mouth opening as if to speak, but only blood pouring out before he collapsed onto the floor, eyes wide in disbelief that his brother had truly killed him. Elena turning away, clamping her hand over her mouth to stifle a sob, knowing who Dominic was and what he was capable of, yet still unprepared for the shock of witnessing a killing with her own eyes. Dominic rising from his brother's body with blood staining his hands and clothes, his face utterly blank, as if he had done the most ordinary thing in the world, turning to Elena and telling her hoarsely that they had to leave before the police arrived. 2 weeks later, everything had changed. Victor was dead, his followers had been eliminated, and Dominic Aurelio had reclaimed complete control of the family empire. Lorenzo had brought Dominic and his children back to the estate, and their lives returned to normal, or at least normal by Mafia standards. While Elena sat in her small apartment, her pregnant belly now clearly visible, when there was a knock at the door, she opened it to find Dominic standing there, not in the powerful black suit of a crime boss, but in a simple shirt and jeans, looking like an ordinary man visiting a friend, stepping inside and glancing around as if remembering the days he had lived there, learning to cook instant noodles and wash clothes by hand, telling her after a moment of silence that he wanted to make her an offer, that he wanted her and Sophia to come live at his estate, where they would be cared for and protected, and never have to worry about money or safety again, that Marco and Isabella missed her and Sophia and asked about them every day. Elena looking at him with her heart torn in two, part of her wanting to say yes, wanting safety and stability, wanting Sophia to have playmates, and wanting to stay close to the man who had changed her life, but the stronger part knowing she did not belong in that world, telling him gently but firmly that she could not, that she was grateful for everything he had done, but she did not belong to his world, that she could not raise her children in a house where violence and death were normal, that she wanted Sophia to grow up ordinary and never witness what she herself had seen. Dominic silent for a long moment, disappointment flickering in his eyes before being carefully concealed, then nodding slowly with respect, and saying that he understood, that he did not like it, but he respected her decision, pulling a stack of documents from his pocket and placing them on the table, telling her she could not stop him from doing this, that it was a trust fund for Sophia and her unborn child, enough to carry them through their education to the end of college without worry. Not payment or repayment, but something he wanted to do for the children who had become part of his heart during those brief days. Elena looking at the papers, then at Dominic with tears filling her eyes, wanting to refuse but not doing so this time, because it was not for her but for Sophia and the child she carried, children who deserved a better future than she alone could give them, whispering her thanks as Dominic nodded and stepped closer, his dark eyes holding an emotion she did not dare name, telling her that if she ever needed anything, day or night, she only had to call and he would come, that she was the most extraordinary woman he had ever met, Elena Vasquez, and that he would never forget what she had done for him and his children, then bending to kiss her forehead gently and with deep respect before turning and walking away, leaving Elena standing there watching his figure disappear down the stairs, tears streaming down her cheeks even though this was exactly what she had wanted. 1 year passed like a long dream that Elena still scarcely dared to believe was real. She had given birth to a healthy baby boy whom she named Daniel after her father, the man who had died because of the Mafia, yet had unknowingly given her the knowledge that saved a Mafia boss's life and changed her own forever. Sophia was now 9 years old and attending a good school near home, no longer burdened by the fear of whether her mother could afford books or supplies. Elena's mother had passed away peacefully after 3 months of compassionate care from the finest doctors, living long enough to see her grandson Daniel born and to smile softly before closing her eyes. Elena herself had returned to nursing school at a community college, the unfinished dream from 10 years earlier, now slowly becoming reality. Her life no longer a relentless race against bills and eviction notices, but a quiet rhythm of days shared with her 2 children, and a growing hope for a brighter future. Yet no matter how much better life became, there remained an empty space in her heart. She did not know how to fill. Every night before sleep she still thought of those abyss, dark eyes and of the man who had looked at her, as if she were the only light in his darkness. She remembered the way he had held her in the hospital, the gentle kiss on her forehead before he walked away, the regret in his eyes when she refused to live in his mansion. She knew she had made the right choice, but doing the right thing did not mean it did not hurt. One autumn morning, as Elena was nursing Daniel while Sophia worked on her homework at the kitchen table, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find a mail carrier holding an elegant white envelope edged in gold. She signed for it and closed the door. Studying the envelope with curiosity, there was no sender's name, only her own name and address written in the careful handwriting of a child. Inside was an invitation card decorated with colorful, childish drawings. "Dear Aunt Elena," written in pencil with charming misspellings. "It is us, Marco and Isabella. We miss you so much, and we miss Sister Sophia so much. Our 6th birthday is this Sunday. Can you come? Our birthday wish is to see you and Sister Sophia again, and to know whether the baby in your belly has been born yet. Dad says you are very busy, but we still wanted to invite you. We love you, Marco and Isabella." Elena sat down and cried, happy tears streaming down her cheeks. Those children, the little angels she had once carried through the night while running for their lives, still remembered her, still loved her, still considered her family. She looked at Sophia, who was watching her with curiosity, and answered that the letter was from Marco and Isabella, inviting them to a birthday. Sophia's eyes lit up like stars, begging to go, and Elena looked at her daughter, then down at Daniel sleeping peacefully in her arms, and made her decision. "Yes, my love, we will go." That Sunday, Elena stood before the gates of the Aurelio estate with Sophia at her side and Daniel in her arms. She had changed in the past year, no longer thin and pale but healthy and full of life, wearing a simple light blue dress bought with her part-time clinic wages, modest yet neat. The gates opened, and Lorenzo stepped forward with a warm, respectful smile, welcoming her inside, and remarking that they had been waiting for her a long time. And as Elena entered, she was stunned by how different the place felt. Bright white walls, fresh flowers everywhere, children's laughter drifting from the garden, no armed guards in sight. Lorenzo explained that after that night, and after Elena left, Dominic had chosen to turn the entire family operation toward legitimate businesses. No more weapons, no more protection rackets, no more violence, now only real estate and restaurants, because he wanted to build an empire his children could inherit with pride rather than shame. And Elena felt her heart race at the thought that Dominic had truly changed. In the garden, she saw him sitting on the grass surrounded by Marco, Isabella, and other children, laughing with that warm, low laugh she remembered from the night he first learned to wash clothes by hand. And when he looked up and saw her, his laughter stopped, and he stood, his dark eyes holding everything she had tried to forget for a year. Longing, tenderness, and something deeper neither dared to name. Marco shouted her name and ran to her with Isabella close behind, hugging her legs and gazing up with shining eyes, marveling at baby Daniel, and pulling Sophia into excited chatter. And Elena knelt to embrace them, whispering how much she had missed them, while Dominic approached quietly and thanked her for coming, saying the children had spoken of her every day and refused to forget her. And as Elena looked at him, she saw not the dangerous boss she had once feared, but a man at peace, one who had found his way, telling her simply that he had changed because of her and what she had shown him in that small apartment, that there was another way to live and another world he could build for his children, that he wanted Marco and Isabella to grow up in the light like Sophia, not in the shadows as he had. And Elena felt her heart soften as she realized the man before her was no longer the monster of rumors but a father who had stepped out of darkness for love, perhaps for her as well. And when he asked quietly for a chance to begin again, not as a mafia boss and a poor woman, but as 2 ordinary people who had survived hell together, Elena answered not with words but by taking his hand, feeling the warmth and strength there, and together they walked into the garden where 5 children waited under the gentle autumn sun. And in that moment Elena understood that sometimes the most beautiful things in life grow from the darkest places, that love can take root where hope seems impossible, that people can change when they find a reason strong enough, that one brave act of kindness can alter countless lives, and that true love does not care about wealth or past sins but only whether 2 people are willing to walk toward the future side by side. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. If it touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. Like and share this video so we can continue bringing you more moving and meaningful stories each day. How do you feel about Elena and Dominic's journey? Have you ever faced a moment where your kindness was truly tested? Do you believe people can change because of love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would truly love to hear what lies in your hearts. And finally, we wish you good health, daily joy, and lasting peace, no matter how difficult life may be. Remember that, like Elena, sometimes one brave decision and one act of kindness can change not only our own lives, but the lives of those around us. Goodbye and see you in the next video.